The china glistened under the chandelier as I sat across from my parents at their long mahogany table. It was the kind of setting they thrived in, formal, controlled, everything polished until it gleamed. My mother, Marjorie, poured another glass of wine as my father, Alden, slid a thick envelope across the table. "Serafina," he said smoothly, "this is about security. For you. For all of us." I rested my hands in my lap, steadying my breath. The envelope lay between us like a challenge. My mother smiled as though she were offering me dessert. "It's just a formality. One family, one future." I pulled the papers free, scanning the first page. The words blurred for a moment, but the intent was clear. Every account, every investment, every property I had built was to be placed into a family trust, managed solely by them. My father nudged a pen closer. "This way. We all move forward together. No more silos. No more risk." Inside, something coiled tight. They weren't just asking, they were demanding everything I had spent my adult life creating. I looked up slowly, catching the faint triumph in their eyes, the expectation that I would fold out of duty, or guilt, or both. Instead, I let my lips curve into a calm smile. "If this is truly about trust, then you won't mind what I've prepared." For the first time that evening, their expressions faltered. My mother's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. My father's jaw flexed. At that precise moment, the butler stepped into the dining room, his voice formal but edged with tension. "Ma'am," he said, "your lawyer is here." I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. The real conversation was about to begin. When Helena's heels clicked against the floor behind me, I felt the weight of my parents' stares sharpen. But before the first word left her mouth, my mind pulled me back to the years that had carried me here, the years when I learned no one was coming to save me. In my early 20s, Portland was shifting, neighborhoods gentrifying faster than anyone could keep up. I saw it as opportunity. While friends spent their weekends at bars, I was crouched on the floors of run-down kitchens, stripping tiles, painting cabinets, and coaxing life back into homes most people wouldn't glance at twice. My hands blistered, my back ached, but I kept going. I reinvested every dollar I made, flipping one house into the down payment for another. At 25, I signed the papers on my first Craftsman duplex. Holding the keys felt like holding proof that discipline mattered more than pedigree. Still, when I showed my parents, their reaction was a dismissive laugh. "You were lucky the market turned," my mother said. "Without us, you'd never manage," my father added. Their words stung, but not more than the memory I carried from college the day I asked them to co-sign my student loan. They refused, claiming it would teach me responsibility. It did, though not in the way they intended. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, lived in a cramped basement apartment with mold on the walls. Their refusal cut me, but it also forged me. Over time, the duplex became 3 properties, then 5. I learned to negotiate, to anticipate market turns, to stand firm when contractors tried to talk down to me. Each decision, each closing, each mortgage paid off was my own doing. My parents never lifted a finger, yet they acted as though my success reflected on them. Now, as I sat in their dining room, contract heavy in my hands, I realized their neglect had given me the very independence they despised, and I knew it was that independence they were trying so hard to strip away. Looking back, I realized the contract at the dinner table wasn't born out of thin air. My parents had been testing the waters for years, softening me with little jabs disguised as family wisdom. "You should merge finances," my mother once said over coffee, her tone deceptively casual. "Family must stick together. What's the point of keeping things separate if we're all working toward the same future?" My father preferred guilt as his weapon. "After all we sacrificed for you, don't we deserve to feel secure? Money should circulate within the family, not sit idle in your accounts." At the time, I brushed their comments aside. I told myself it was just their way of holding on, of trying to stay relevant in a world that was quickly moving past them. Still, their words always left a sting, like a faint burn I couldn't quite soothe. One afternoon, I came home early from a showing and found my father in my apartment. The lease had my name alone, the locks were new, yet there he was, rifling through the drawer where I kept property deeds and bank statements. He looked up, startled, before recovering with a stiff smile. "Just curious," he said, as if curiosity gave him a right to my life. I forced a laugh, told myself he was old-fashioned, raised in an era where a father felt entitled to his child's papers, but when he left, I noticed the envelope holding my latest closing statement was half out of place, like a page had been thumbed too far. For a while, I convinced myself it was nothing. Parents worried, parents' pride, parents crossed boundaries out of love, but deep down, a small voice began to whisper that it wasn't love at all. It was entitlement. That voice grew louder each time they brought up unity and legacy, until it was impossible to ignore. And by the time the contract appeared on the dinner table, I knew that whisper had been right all along. Helena's arrival was as sharp as a blade slicing through silk. She stepped into the dining room with her briefcase in hand, her eyes cool, assessing the scene before her. My parents stiffened in unison, as though they hadn't expected me to arrive with armor. "Good evening," Helena said smoothly, setting her case on the edge of the table. "I understand there's a contract my client is supposed to sign." Marjorie's smile cracked. "This is a private family matter. There's no need for lawyers." Helena ignored her, sliding the papers from the envelope. She flipped through them quickly, her brow arching higher with each page. Then came the smirk. "Wow," she murmured, closing the folder with a snap. "This isn't a trust. It's a complete transfer of authority. If Serafina signed this, you'd have unilateral control over her assets. Every dollar, every property, every account." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father recovered first. "It's about trust. Helena, about protecting our family from risk." His voice was calm, but the muscle in his jaw betrayed him. "Interesting," Helena replied evenly, "because what I see is a document where Serafina loses every right to her own money. If it's really about trust, why is she the only one who surrenders anything?" My mother leaned forward, her tone syrupy sweet. "You know us. Serafina, we'd never hurt you. This is just a formality." I sat back, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The contract lay on the table between us, a symbol of everything they thought they could demand. I could feel their eyes pressing against me, willing me to break, to cave, to sign. Instead, I looked directly at them and let my voice cut through the air like glass. "We're finished here tonight. For the first time in my life, I saw something rare in my parents' expressions, not control, not confidence, but fear. It flickered across their faces before they masked it, but I caught it, and it settled into me like a promise. I pushed my chair back, steady and deliberate, already knowing they wouldn't let this end so easily. I had barely risen from my chair when my father's voice cut through the air. "Sit down. Serafina, you're not thinking clearly." My mother's hand fluttered toward the untouched wine glass in front of me. "There's something you need to hear first," she said, her tone softer than I'd heard it all evening. "Something that changes everything." Against my better judgment, I eased back into my seat. Helena stood behind me, arms crossed, her presence a steady anchor. My father steepled his fingers and fixed me with a measured stare. "The Vance estate in Rhode Island," he began, "has been tied up in probate for years. But the process is nearing its end. We're poised to regain full control of the property and its assets. It's worth more than you can imagine." Marjorie leaned in, her smile sharp but dressed in warmth. "And of course, you are our daughter. You stand to benefit as much as we do. But unity is essential. Probate courts value stability. Families that fracture, well, let's just say judges don't look kindly on chaos. The implication was unmistakable. Sign the contract, prove my loyalty, and I'd be welcomed into the circle of inheritance. Refuse, and I'd be cast out. For a moment, I let them talk, their words dripping like honey over poison. They painted the estate as a fortress of history and legacy, something that was rightfully mine if only I'd surrender my independence. But beneath the varnish, I saw the truth. The Rhode Island estate wasn't a gift, it was a leash. They wanted me tethered, bound not just by blood, but by paper and pen. My wealth had become their bargaining chip, and the so-called inheritance was the bait. I glanced at Helena. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me she understood. This wasn't about legacy, it was about control. My father's glare hardened, a storm gathering behind his calm facade. "Without us," he said flatly, "you'll lose everything." I straightened my spine, steadying my breath. The irony nearly made me laugh. They had given me nothing, yet now they threatened to take it all. Helena placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent reminder that we weren't finished. And I knew then that the only way forward was not just to defend what I had built, but to uncover just how deep their desperation ran. After that dinner, I knew talk would get me nowhere. My parents weren't negotiating, they were cornering. So the very next morning, I hired a private investigator. His name was Grant Mercer, a man with a reputation for finding truths people went to great lengths to bury. He worked quickly. Within a week, he placed a thick file on Helena's desk, and we went through it together. Each page was a window into the life my parents had been hiding, the Rhode Island estate they had dangled in front of me. It was mortgaged to the hilt, collateral for loans they had taken out over the last decade, the grand image of wealth they paraded antique furnishings, charitable galas, curated elegance was a mirage. Behind it lay years of reckless spending patched together by desperate borrowing. But the worst blow came near the end of the file, an application for a new credit line, bearing my name. My signature had been forged, but it was careful someone who had watched me sign documents countless times. I stared at the page until the lines blurred, rage and disbelief clawing at me. I thought about the little passbook savings account they opened for me when I was a child. I remembered my father lifting me up to the teller's counter, telling me I was learning responsibility. Back then, I believed them. Now, looking at the forged document, I realized they weren't teaching me responsibility at all. They were teaching themselves access. Helena's voice broke through my haze. "This isn't just manipulation. Serafina, it's fraud, and it's criminal." The betrayal felt heavier than the paper in my hands. These were the people who raised me, who claimed to know what was best for me. Now they were stealing not just from my accounts, but from the very identity I had built without them. I set the file down and forced my hands to unclench. If they had crossed this line, there was no telling how far they were willing to go. And I knew the next step was to confront not just their debts, but the twisted logic that justified it all. The forged credit line haunted me long after I left Helena's office. It wasn't just the act itself, it was what it revealed. Late that night, lying awake, my mind wandered back to memories I had never questioned until now. When I was 10, I begged for piano lessons. My parents refused, telling me I needed to learn discipline without indulgence. When I asked for help with college applications, they brushed me off with a lecture about independence. And when I pleaded for a co-signature on my first loan, they refused again, claiming it was tough love. For years, I carried those moments like badges of resilience, proof that I could weather anything without their support. But looking back now, I saw them for what they were: rehearsals. They weren't teaching me independence, they were conditioning me to accept abandonment, to normalize neglect so that when exploitation came later, I might confuse it with love. The thought made me sick. Still, guilt slithered in, whispering that I was being unfair. After all, hadn't they given me a roof, meals, clothes? Wasn't I ungrateful for rejecting the people who raised me? I voiced this once to Helena, and she leaned forward, eyes steady on mine. Protecting yourself isn't betrayal. Serafina, betrayal already happened to you. Don't mistake survival for selfishness. Her words settled into me like stone, solid and undeniable. The weight of years lifted, replaced by something harder, sharper. I wasn't the child they'd tried to mold anymore. I wasn't someone who would bend out of guilt or fold under obligation. By the time I left her office that evening, my resolve was clear. My parents had rewritten my childhood into a story of sacrifice and obedience. Now, it was my turn to rewrite the ending, and I knew exactly where the confrontation had to begin. Helena wasted no time after the forged credit line surfaced. She brought in a forensic accountant she trusted, a quiet man named Drayton who had a talent for tracing money through shadows. Within days, he uncovered what I suspected but hadn't been able to prove, a hidden offshore account in my parents' names. The statements were staggering. Transfers from shell companies, loans stacked on loans, and debts rolled over like dice on a rigged table. They had been juggling liabilities for years, using the illusion of wealth to buy more time. The truth was plain without an infusion of cash. Their empire was already crumbling, and the lifeline they had chosen was me. Helena's office became a war room. She assembled the evidence into a clean, devastating file fraud, attempted forgery, coercion, each section airtight, each page a nail in the coffin of their performance as noble benefactors. But I knew facts alone wouldn't be enough. My parents thrived on narrative, on turning guilt into currency. So I added something they couldn't dismiss as technical memory turned tangible. Years ago, my grandmother's locket and my grandfather's cufflinks had disappeared from the family safe. My parents told me they were being appraised. I accepted the explanation back then, but part of me always knew better. Now, tucked into Drayton's report, I placed the pawnshop receipts Helena had tracked down, proof they had sold our heirlooms for quick cash, proof their theft reached back not just into my adulthood, but into the very legacy they claimed to protect. When I looked at the growing pile of documents, I felt no satisfaction, only clarity. They had built a tower of lies so tall it was bound to collapse. All I needed to do was give it the right push. And for that, there was only one place left to deliver the blow back at their own dinner table. The next invitation arrived in the same gilded envelope as always, thick with pretense. My parents thought I would come alone. But I walked into their dining room with Helena at my side. The table was set with crystal and silver, but beneath the gleam, I could feel the tension pressing like humidity before a storm. Alden greeted me with his familiar air of command. "We trust you've reconsidered," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Marjorie's smile was brittle, her eyes shining with the confidence of someone convinced victory was inevitable. I sat. But instead of opening the folder they had prepared for me, Helena placed our own file squarely in the center of the table. She flipped it open with deliberate calm. Offshore accounts, forged signatures, pawned heirlooms, and debts stacked so high the estate is a hollow shell. The color drained from my mother's face. She reached across the table, her voice breaking. "Serafina, this isn't what it looks like. We only wanted to protect the family, to protect you." My father's composure cracked in a different direction. His fist slammed the armrest, rattling the silverware. "This is betrayal. After all we've done, you dare to side with outsiders against us?" I met his fury with steady eyes. "Family doesn't mean ownership. You've mistaken me for your rescue fund. I won't be the solution to debts you created." Marjorie's pleas dissolved into sobs, while Alden's glare cut across the room like a blade. But neither had time to recover. The sound of sirens filtered through the tall windows. growing louder until red and blue lights strobed against the glass. Helena closed the file and leaned back as footsteps echoed in the hall. The knock at the door was sharp, final. I watched as the officers entered, my parents' faces collapsing under the weight of exposure. And in that moment, I understood there was no turning back. The weeks that followed moved quickly. News of the investigation spread, and with it the collapse of the illusion my parents had built. The Rhode Island estate, once their proudest boast, was pulled into foreclosure. Creditors lined up at every door, stripping away what little remained of their borrowed grandeur. I watched from a distance, not with glee, but with a clarity I had never felt before. Their downfall wasn't mine to mourn, it was theirs to own. Meanwhile, I tightened the guard around my own life. Every property deed, every account statement, every safeguard I had prepared was secured in a fireproof safe. I changed locks, updated passwords, left nothing vulnerable. For the first time, my future felt entirely mine, untouched by guilt or expectation. One evening, I sat across from Helena at a quiet wine bar. Between us, no contracts, no files, just 2 glasses and the steady hum of relief. She raised hers with a small smile. "To freedom hard-earned," she said. I clinked my glass against hers, the sound sharp, decisive. "To freedom," I echoed, letting the words settle deep in my chest. Blood ties had once defined me, a thread I thought I was obligated to follow no matter where it led. But now I knew better. Love could exist without control, and family could be chosen, not imposed. As I walked home that night, the air felt lighter, the city streets alive with possibility. Freedom, I realized, was my truest inheritance, and I intended to protect it with everything I had.